It's September 20th, which means we are 46 days away from the election, and I, for one, cannot wait for the country to be put out of its own misery because these news cycles are exhausting me. I don't know about the rest of you. Hey guys, I'm Hannah Cox with Base Politics, and you're watching the Base Politics Show. This week, the GOP continues its weird obsession with women who don't have bio kids as Trump surrogate Sarah Huckabee Sanders takes shots at non-moms during a recent Trump rally. They're doing this while Democrats point to a recent case out of Georgia, my home state, of a young mom who died thanks to the Republican state legislature's extreme abortion ban in the state. And J.D. Vance admits to lying about the pet eating hoax in Ohio, but claims the ends justify the means, as the initial cat that sparked the whole story is found safe in its owner's basement. Plus, despite the Biden-Harris administration prostituting itself for unions over the past 4 years, the Teamsters have announced that they will not be endorsing a candidate, and the Fed slashes interest rates for the first time in years. What does that mean for you? We're covering all of that today. But before we dive into this episode, make sure you like the video, subscribe to my channel if you have not already, and of course, ring that notification bell so you never miss one of my episodes. Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was also Trump's first press secretary, appeared to sneer at the Democratic presidential candidate for not having biological children at a town hall event in Flint, Michigan with Donald Trump on Tuesday of this week. Kamala Harris's lack of bio children, despite being a step-parent, has become a frequent target of Republicans that are attached to the Trump campaign. Let's watch her comments here.
So my kids keep me humble. Unfortunately, Kamala Harris doesn't have anything keeping her humble.
I just want to provide a quick refresher on the definition of the word humble real quick, because I think it's kind of ironic. Humble, having or showing a modest or low estimate of one's own importance, or low social, administrative, or political rank, lower of in dignity or importance. I'm sorry, it just doesn't seem super humble to me to be running around claiming that you are more self-important than other women because you popped a few kids out, okay? Doesn't track at all. The remarks were met with obvious criticism, from me included. At this point, it really is hard to argue with accusations that this party is just obsessed with getting women back into the kitchen and keeping them pregnant, which is weird. I think arguments about humanity's survival and the birth rate decline do not explain this obsession away. There are more people on Earth than ever before. AI is quickly replacing a lot of jobs that need doing. These concerns over the birth rate are overblown at best, and in all likelihood, staunchly incorrect and just an excuse to hyperfixate on women's reproductive choices. Personally, I find arguments that we likely need fewer people in coming decades due to AI and technology far more economically compelling, and I think I might actually try to bring somebody on who is truly trained in economics to discuss this soon. But at base, when politicians obsess over the birth rate, it is ultimately for one reason, and one reason alone. And that is that they need you to create more wage slaves to keep the pyramid scheme of a joke of a government we've got going on. What any party that actually wants limited government and individual liberty and capitalism would be doing is working to deconstruct this pyramid scheme of a government and acknowledge that individuals make rational choices based on their self-interest, having kids amongst them. So if people are choosing not to do so, you have to trust that that is in their best interest and leave them alone. The economy will adjust so long as you don't have a pyramid scheme of a government you need to keep propped up. There is no need to centrally plan the birth rate. The law of economics works just fine when you let it. Labor is ultimately part of the supply chain. Without government, and when you actually have free movement, labor will always rise to meet demand. This is basic capitalism. It's 101. And it's why Adam Smith argued that you cannot have free markets without free movement. But the GOP is no longer the party of capitalism or individual liberty or limited government. I think that much is vividly apparent. Instead, they are now the party that wants the government to dictate how many kids you have so that they can keep the government funded. Like, stop and really think about that for a minute. It's creepy, it's dystopian, and it's just extremely hypocritical based on every principle they claim to espouse. And what makes it even more sinister is that the very small concerns around birth rate decline that might be valid could easily be assuaged by immigration in this country. We're really not in danger in the U.S. of not having the workers we need to keep our economy going and growing. We're actually quite fortunate in that way. Other countries that really are seeing significant birth rate declines like Japan, they don't have the number of people trying to come there and work like we do. And so this actually could be a huge stagnating effect for them. Not true in the U.S. because we are still a great country. Despite everything going on here, we do have a plethora of people who are trying to come here. And thus, anybody obsessing over the birth rate really should be able to look at that picture and have their fears assuaged. It's really not a pressing problem here in the U.S. But as they have made quite clear in recent years, the GOP doesn't want those people having babies. They don't want those people here at all, which we're going to get into in a minute. So instead, they're launching this pressure campaign to malign and attack women who won't bow the knee and go along with their scheme. I've personally never thought that these people were the most strategic. I've worked for groups on both the right and left, and I can tell you firsthand, the left is much smarter in its messaging, much smarter about its long-term strategies to move people to their way of thinking, whereas the GOP seems to genuinely think it's going to bully people who are walking away from them back into submission, which is kind of hilarious. It's like the nerdy kid on the playground, like throwing dirt at the popular kids who won't play with them. Women are fleeing the right in droves, and they just keep running with this. It's phenomenally stupid, but honestly a little bit entertaining to watch at this point. Sarah Spector quote tweeted Sarah Huckabee Sanders' statements on Twitter and said, "Shaming a woman for not having children is draconian. I had a large tumor on my ovaries in my 30s, which ended my chance to have children. Sarah Huckabee Sanders is a horrible human being." And Michael Ian Black said, "I can't recall a single male politician being criticized for not having biological children, and neither can I, for the record." Not only did this not play out well on Twitter with the grassroots, it even caused some within the Trump campaign to finally break ranks and speak out because it is high-key crazy. This is Trump 2024 senior advisor Brian Lanza and his statements on CNN regarding comments made by Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
But I do want to get back to Sarah Huckabee Sanders' comment. I, too, was blessed to have a stepmother. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be able to have normal conversations without a stepmother. So I found that comment to be actually offensive. I don't know what more to say about that. I'm disappointed in Sarah was saying that. I'm sure I'm going to get criticism from the campaign. But I have to sort of defend somebody who's a stepmom. It's a tough job. People step into that role. It's usually a difficult dynamic. My mom excelled at it. I'm sure your mom excelled at it. I'm sure you excelled at it. And we should reward that and sort of speak of that in a very high tone.
Like, I just have to kind of pop off here for a minute because it continues to blow my mind the way that some biological parents think they are somehow more special than people who don't have biological kids. It actually takes nothing to love a kid that you created and that looks like you. Somebody coming in and stepping into a dynamic where they have to deal with an ex-wife and a bio mom and take care of kids who are not their own. I can't think of something that would require more humility, to be honest. And it's just such a slap in the face. I mean, it's very, very clear at this point, again, that they are really trying to launch a pressure campaign to push more women into having kids. But what's even crazier about that is that they're not just mad at women who don't have kids. They're mad at women who don't have biological kids. So having a step kid isn't good enough to be in the club. Adopting kids isn't good enough to be in the club. Like, this is actually just an attack on women. And it's so bad, okay? Like, I don't know if you've been around many, stepmom, bio-mom dynamics. I personally am in one. I have stepchildren. And secondarily, I consume a lot of content on TikTok around this. I can tell you firsthand, the relationship between the two parties is often not very cozy and more frequently openly hostile. And so with that in mind, it's even more interesting that these attacks have actually prompted the biological mother of Kamala's stepkids to speak out in her defense. This is reporting from The Independent, and they say, interestingly enough, it even got Kamala's husband's ex-wife to come to her defense. Kirsten Irmhoff rushed to Harris's defense after Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders appeared to sneer at the Democratic presidential candidate for not having biological children at a town hall event in Flint, Michigan with Donald Trump on Tuesday. Quote, "Cole and Ella keep us inspired to make the world a better place," she wrote. "I do it through storytelling. Kamala Harris has spent her entire career working for the people, all families. That keeps you pretty humble." Kirsten has consistently supported Harris politically and personally, including attending her 2021 inauguration as the vice president. She defended Harris in July against the, quote, "childless cat lady" attacks hurled by Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance. She told CNN that Kamala has been a co-parent with her and Doug since their kids were teenagers. Quote, "I love our blended family and am grateful to have her in it," Kirsten said. Ella the 25-year-old model, fashion designer, and artist, also defended her stepmother on Instagram, saying, "How can you be childless when you have cutie pie kids like Cole and I?" Now, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, 16% of children in the United States live in blended families, which means that 40% of American families are blended. This includes children living with a step-parent, step-sibling, or half-sibling, and yet they are attacking step-parents. Like, are the brain cells functioning? Like, do they have two to rub together? I am genuinely, it's phenomenal to watch. It's crazy. I mean, I guess when you start down a path, all you can do is double down, but good Lord, the optics are terrible. And as I mentioned, the GOP is continuing to double down on its attacks against women without children, even as more and more accounts continue to pour in of women being harmed by extreme abortion bans that have been passed in some states post the Dobbs decision. And this week, an account of a woman who died in Georgia shortly after our own Republican legislature passed an extreme 6-week ban on abortion took off online. Now, Georgia's 6-week ban went into effect in July of 2022. And according to this report from ProPublica, 2 weeks later, a young mother named Amber Nicole Thurman was dead. They say that on the day the law went into effect, her pregnancy had just passed the 6-week mark. And I want to be clear on a few things before we get into this story. As I've said throughout many episodes of this show, I think abortion is a very murky subject. I personally think that I don't want the government involved in healthcare decisions at all. I truly am a very limited government person. I, as a pragmatist, though, am fine with some restrictions on abortion and would probably put that line where I think the vast majority of Americans would agree it should be, which is somewhere past the first trimester. A 6-week ban is unhinged. At 6 weeks, there is no baby there, okay? You cannot see a baby on an ultrasound. That is just, it's not there. It is actually a bunch of cells at that point in time. This is well before the vast majority of women have any idea that they are pregnant at all. And the way that they have written these laws, while they will claim that they have made some exceptions for health and safety of the mother, the lawmakers, these aren't like the sharpest tools in the shed, okay? And the legal parameters with which they are writing these laws are very, very murky. And so it is essentially, they are handing down these laws. They are not well defined. It's quite subjective what qualifies as something that needs to happen to protect the health and safety of a mother. Doctors and nurses and the hospitals and everybody else who has to be involved in these decisions are unclear of where the line is, and they face very, very significant penalties if they happen to cross over them. And so what happens is that they put off care that needs to be administered because they are afraid of getting sued or charged thanks to the moronic lawmaking of these Republican state legislatures. And I have to say, I'm really sick of people trying to pin this on Trump, okay? I get that it's an election year. I get that people are going to try to take their cheap shots. Trump didn't do this. He has actually spoken out against these kinds of bans because they are stupid. They're asinine. He did help get rid of Roe. I'm fine with that. As somebody who is mostly pro-choice, I'm still fine with getting rid of Roe because it was bad law. It was made up out of thin air. That means it's bad legal precedent, okay? Judges shouldn't get to make up law out of thin air. That's not how things work in a democracy. So getting rid of Roe is fine. What happened next in some of these red states is not. But the people who are responsible for that are the Republican state legislatures, who are not representing the will of the people, because we've seen that every time, even in the reddest of states, when this issue has come to the ballot, the people have voted in favor of choice and keeping the government out of women's health care. And ultimately, when you support these kinds of laws, you do endanger women's lives. Period. This was predicted and it is playing out. And this is probably one of the few cases we've seen over the past 2 years where a woman has actually been killed. But there are countless stories of women online who have not been able to get care expediently, who have had to travel for it, who have lasting healthcare issues because of that fact. You are messing with people's lives. And this is why it is always a problem to let the government get involved in healthcare, period. Now, because there has been a lot of, I would say, disingenuous pushback on this case in Georgia from the right, they're trying to excuse it and basically try to say that the law itself is not what is actually responsible for this woman's death. I want to read you the actual reporting behind the case. Again, this is reporting from ProPublica, and as they point out, as the law was going into effect, Thurman was just realizing that she was pregnant. She was a single mom. She could not afford the second pregnancy, and she was just past the limits of the state law. And so they say Thurman wanted a surgical abortion close to home and held out hope as advocates tried to get the ban paused in court. But as her pregnancy progressed to its 9th week, she couldn't wait any longer. She scheduled a D&C in North Carolina, where abortion at that stage was still legal. And on August 13th, she woke up at 4 a.m. to make the journey with her best friend. On their drive, they hit standstill traffic. The clinic couldn't hold Thurman's spot longer than 15 minutes. It was inundated with women from other states where bans had taken effect. Instead, a clinic employee offered Thurman a 2-pill abortion regimen approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, mifepristone and misoprostol. Her pregnancy was well within the standard of care for that treatment. Although I looked it up, she was at the line. They really don't recommend the pill past 10 weeks. They say in getting to the clinic had required scheduling a day off from work, finding a babysitter, making up an excuse to borrow a relative's car, and walking through a crowd of anti-abortion protesters. Thurman really didn't want to reschedule, so she took the pills, one of which was administered there. She then went home to take the secondary pill. Now, according to standard procedure, it seems that typically when a woman is taking the pill, they're supposed to come back in within a couple days to have a ultrasound to make sure that there's not tissue left and to ensure that they don't need a D&C or something so that they don't get very sick. Because she had to travel to go to another state due to the 6-week ban, she then was no longer under the care of a doctor and did not have that routine checkup as she should have. ProPublica goes on to report that at first she only had cramping, which was expected, but days after she took the second pill, the pain increased and blood was soaking through more than 1 pad per hour. If she had lived nearby, the clinic in North Carolina could have performed a D&C for free as soon as she followed up, the executive director told ProPublica, but Thurman was 4 hours away at that point. On the evening of August 18th, Thurman vomited blood and passed out at home. According to 911 logs, her boyfriend then called for an ambulance and she arrived at Piedmont Henry Hospital in Stockbridge at 6:51 p.m. Now, what happened next is ghastly, and we are still waiting for full information. The hospital is obviously not going to be forthcoming with that because they are probably going to face a lawsuit for what happened next. But it does appear that what she needed was an immediate D&C that they continued to put off while administering some other types of care, and that they were discussing giving her a D&C. But it seems the most likely thing that happened is that because they were unsure of exactly where the line was, they weren't sure they could give her a D&C without getting in trouble because the law had just been passed. They didn't have very good guidance. They basically were trying to ensure her life was actually on the line before they intervened. And that's been happening a lot across this country. I've heard from tons of medical professionals and people who work within hospitals saying this is something that they're worried about. It's something I've seen firsthand, okay? It's like a much lower stake scenario, but I run a nonprofit. And if you talk to any lawyers around nonprofits, they will say, you know, the law around how much nonprofits can lobby is pretty ambiguous. And so because of that, most nonprofits will skew way over here, way away from the line. They're so afraid of getting near it because they don't know exactly where it is, and because it's kind of ambiguous and subjective, so the IRS could just like willy-nilly decide when they want to randomly enforce it and be like, oh, you got a little close if they don't like you. The same thing applies here with doctors and hospitals, obviously. Their careers and even their lives are on the line, right? Because many of these states have put criminal charges in place if doctors and hospitals act as well as civil penalties. And so they are going to err on the side of protecting themselves, which is going to get women killed. And it seems that's exactly what happened here. Further reporting from ProPublica says Piedmont did not have a policy to guide doctors on how to interpret the state abortion ban when Thurman arrived for care, according to 2 people with knowledge of internal conversations who were not authorized to speak publicly. In the months after she died, an internal task force of providers there created policies to educate staff on how to navigate the law, though they are not able to give legal advice, the sources said. In interviews with more than a dozen OBGYNs in states that have outlawed abortion, ProPublica learned how difficult it is to interpret the vague and conflicting language in bans, medical exceptions, especially the doctor said, when their judgment could be called into question under the threat of prison time. Take the language in Georgia's supposed life-saving exceptions. It prohibits doctors from using any instrument with, quote, the purpose of terminating a pregnancy. While removing fetal tissue is not terminating a pregnancy, medically speaking, the law only specifies it's not considered an abortion to remove, quote, a dead unborn child that resulted from a, quote, spontaneous abortion, defined as naturally occurring from a miscarriage or a stillbirth. Thurman had told doctors her miscarriage was not spontaneous. It was the result of taking pills to terminate her pregnancy. So obviously, there was some confusion on whether or not they could act, most likely. There's also an exception included in most bans to allow abortions, quote, necessary in order to prevent the death of the pregnant woman or the substantial and irreversible physical impairment of a major bodily function. There is no standard protocol for how providers should interpret such language, doctors said, however. How can they be sure a jury with no medical experience would agree that intervening was, quote, necessary? So the burden of proof is going to be on them. That's why they're taking their time, dotting their I's and crossing their T's in these scenarios. Republican officials across the country have largely rejected calls to provide guidance on these laws as well. When legislators have tried, anti-abortion groups have blocked them. In 2023, a group of Tennessee Republicans was unable to push through a small change to the state's abortion ban intended to give doctors greater leeway when intervening for patients facing health complications. No one wants to tell the spouse, child, or loved one that their life is not important in a medical emergency as you watch them die when they could have been saved, said Republican Representative Esther Helton Hayes, a nurse who sponsored the bill. The state's main anti-abortion lobbyist, Will Brewer, vigorously opposed the change. Some pregnancy complications, quote, work themselves out, he told a panel of lawmakers. Doctors should be required to pause and wait this out and see how it goes. At some hospitals, doctors are doing just that. Doctors told ProPublica they have seen colleagues disregard the standard of care when their patients are at risk of infection and wait to see if miscarriage completes naturally before offering a D&C. Although no doctor has been prosecuted for violating abortion bans, the possibility looms over every case, they said, particularly outside of well-funded academic institutions that have lawyers promising criminal defense. Doctors in public hospitals and those outside of major metro areas told ProPublica that they are often left scrambling to figure out on a case-by-case basis when they're allowed to provide D&Cs and other abortion procedures. Many fear they are taking on all of the risk alone and would not be backed up by their hospitals if a prosecutor charged them with a crime. I think people of good faith can have discussions on what restrictions need to be in place on abortion, but I think the 6-week ban is nowhere near the ethical approach to these situations. And I think you will continue to see women harmed or killed because of these kinds of laws. And it's inexcusable. You cannot claim to be pro-life, and then when presented with evidence that these laws are harming lives that are already here, shrug your shoulders. And that's what I've seen a lot of Republicans doing in response to this story, saying, well, she shouldn't have had an abortion. Guess she shouldn't have gotten pregnant. Oh, well, you're not pro-life. You're not pro-life. If you don't care that this woman died due to the government interfering in her health care, you're not pro-life, you're not pro-limited government, and you need to really examine your ethics. It's sick. All right, well, moving on to our next doozy of a story. I also personally don't think you can be pro-life and make up racist stories about tens of thousands of people that put their lives in danger and cause chaos in small-town America, but that's what J.D. Vance did, and he's not sorry. No, not one bit. For all the conspiracy theory, broken tribal brains in my comments that insisted with weeping and gnashing of teeth that the pet eating story in Ohio would bear out to be true, despite all evidence to the contrary, I just want to say I was right and you were wrong. Your dear leaders played you for fools. You need to reckon with that and adjust your behavior if you want to be taken seriously moving forward. And it's so funny to me, okay, before I get into this, I just have to say, the amount of people that get mad at people like me who are doubling down and continuing to point out that this is false and saying, like, why do you keep focusing on this? Why do you keep harping on about it? What you should be mad at are your leaders that lied to you, that made you look foolish. But you're not mad. You don't want true accountability. Instead, you're mad at the people telling the truth and holding people in power to account. That's very, very weird behavior. Now, first, Vance admitted on live TV to making the entire thing up after he was frankly unable to escape the mounting proof against him. Watch.
Just once and for all, you again started this in part by saying that, which Donald Trump repeated on the debate stage, that, and he didn't say anything about the policies that you're talking about. He just said Haitians are eating dogs and cats. Can you affirmatively say now that that is a rumor that has no basis with evidence?
Dana, the evidence is the first-hand account of my constituents who are telling me that this happened. And by the way, I've been trying to talk about the problems in Springfield for months, and the American media ignored it. There was a congressional hearing just last week of angel moms who lost children because Kamala Harris let criminal migrants into this country who then murdered their children. The American media totally ignored this stuff until Donald Trump and I started talking about cat memes. If I have to,
but it wasn't just a meme,
create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do, Dana, because you guys are completely letting Kamala Harris coast. You had one interview with her. You talk about pushing back against me, Dana. You didn't push back against the fact that she cast the deciding vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which is why a lot of Americans can't afford food and housing.
You just said that you're creating a story.
Public policy.
Sir, you just said that you're creating the story.
What's that, Dana?
You just said that this is a story that you created. So then The eating dogs and cats thing is not accurate.
Dana, it comes from firsthand accounts from my constituents. I say that we're creating a story, meaning we're creating the American media focusing on it. I didn't create 20,000 illegal migrants coming into Springfield thanks to Kamala Harris's policies. Her policies did that, but yes, we created the actual focus that allowed the American media to talk about this story and the suffering caused by Kamala Harris's policies.
Now, as this clip started circulating online, because it is bonkers crazy, what was even crazier was to see the number of Republicans who were still defending this man. And it made me think of this quote by Hannah Arendt. More people need to read Hannah Arendt. She said, "Mass propaganda discovered that its audience was ready at all times to believe the worst, no matter how absurd, and did not particularly object to being deceived because it held every statement to be a lie anyhow. The totalitarian mass leaders based their propaganda on the correct psychological assumption that under such conditions, one could make people believe the most fantastic statements one day and trust that if the next day they were given irrefutable proof of their falsehood, they would take refuge in cynicism. Instead of deserting their leaders who had lied to them, they would protest that they had known all along that the statement was a lie and would admire the leaders for their superior tactical cleverness." It's so creepy to see all of these quotes applied to dystopian novels or historical events being accurately applied today, because it's exactly what the MAGA cult has done in response to this, right? They have said, well, he had to do it, he had to do it to get people to focus on the real issues of immigration. No, he didn't. People have been talking about immigration. It's ranked as one of the top 2 issues in this election cycle for the past 2 years leading up to it. They literally think this was some brilliant strategy and that he is somehow owning the libs. It is, man, I grew up learning about people in cults, and watching it play out in real, live in person is just, it's next level. It really is. And honestly, JD's statement that he had people calling his office to tell him this. Number one, when's the last time somebody was missing their cat and they're like, you know what I'm going to do? I need to call my U.S. senator because my cat's missing. I don't own cats, but my sister does. And she lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Charleston. And the amount of times we can't find that cat when I'm visiting for hours, even days on end. Cats are really good at hiding. They go missing a lot, first and foremost. And I don't think normal, sane people call their U.S. senator anywhere in the next step course of actions you would do, even if your cat was missing, right? So if you've got crazy people calling your office, and again, I cannot emphasize to you how common this is, okay? I know people who've worked for many representatives, both at the state and federal level. They get a lot of crazy phone calls, okay? There's a lot of crazy people out there. You do not take that story and then run with it and blow it up into a national news story. But that's exactly what JD Vance did. And it is honestly so embarrassing. He continued to get poked and prodded by the media because, again, there was no proof any of this was happening. And as the Wall Street Journal, which is a right-leaning outlet, was questioning him, he, out of desperation, provided them with a police report to prove their claims about cat-eating Haitians in Springfield were true. So the Wall Street Journal actually spoke to the woman who filed this complaint. They followed up, unlike JD Vance in his office. And the lady basically said she later found her cat alive and well in her basement, and she apologized to her Haitian neighbors. She said she felt really bad that this had all gotten so out of hand. The Daily Beast reported on this story, and they tweeted, "Miss Sassy, the missing cat that sparked fear that pets in Ohio were in danger, has been found hiding in her owner's basement." Honestly, these people look like clowns. I don't know how anybody can trust anything anybody who fell for this or ran with this says. Literally anything, okay? They're he had to say this to get more attention on the actual issues that are facing these people. Why would I believe him on any other issue that he claims these people are facing when he can't even get this fact right? These are literally his own constituents, and he stuck a lynch mob on them. Furthermore, it wasn't even 20,000 people. It's not even 20,000 people or Haitians that are in this town. It's actually around 15,000. And the business owners, the city leaders, the pastors all say these are good and hardworking people. And these are legal immigrants. The kinds Republicans claim they have no issue with, which I've always thought was a lie. When you said that Republicans are anti-immigrants or actually just anti-certain immigrants, they've always said, no, I'm fine. I'm fine with immigrants. I just want people to do it legally. I want them to do it the right way. But then they do it legally. They do it the right way. And they make up racist lies about them and stick a lynch mob on them. They hate immigrants. I'm so tired of it. Cut the crap. Just say it with your full chest. We all see right through you anyway. Here's Ohio Republican Governor Mike DeWine with the reality of what's happening on the ground.
It's just not helpful. And again, these people are here legally. They're here legally. and they want to work, and they are, in fact, working. And when you talk to the employers, what the employers tell you is, we don't know what we would do without them. They are working, and they are working very hard, and they're fitting in with our native people from Springfield who have been working in this shop or working in this manufacturing company for a long, long time. So that's what we need to focus on. And, this idea that we have hate groups coming in and this discussion just has to stop. We need to focus on moving forward and not dogs and cats being eaten. It's just ridiculous.
The only thing J.D. Vance seems to be in less supply of, besides actual reports of missing cats, is a sense of shame. He still is doubling down on this and says that he refuses to acknowledge the Haitians are even here legally. Watch.
Hi, Senator. Mia McCarthy with Politico. Question for you about the Haitian migrants in Springfield. So I know you've talked a lot about how we need to deport illegal aliens, but I wanted to ask you, the majority of the Haitians in Springfield came under TPS, so they are here legally. And I know you've expressed a lot of your issues with the TPS program and wanting to change that under a Trump-Vance administration. But I guess my question for you is, if you become the vice president under a Trump administration, what will you guys do about the migrants that are already there, since they did arrive legally? And a follow-up to that, if you plan to deport them, how would you do that legally?
Well, look, this is a media and Kamala Harris fact check that I want to clarify and clear up right now. And here's now, the media loves to say that the Haitian migrants, hundreds of thousands of them, by the way, 20,000 in Springfield, but hundreds of thousands of them all across our country, they are here legally. And what they mean is that Kamala Harris used two separate programs, mass parole and temporary protective status. She used two programs to wave a wand and to say, we're not going to deport those people here. Well, if Kamala Harris waves the wand illegally and says these people are now here legally, I'm still going to call them an illegal alien. An illegal action from Kamala Harris does not make an alien legal. That is not how this works.
Like, dude, you have to be kidding at this point. How are you married to an immigrant running around and saying stuff like this? It will never cease to amaze me. For the record, Congress created the Temporary Protected Status, TPS, in the Immigration Act of 1990. This is not a Kamala or Biden initiative. It is a temporary immigration status provided to nationals of specifically designated countries that are confronting an ongoing armed conflict, environmental disaster, or extraordinary and temporary conditions. So this is not at all an illegal action by Kamala. It's overseen by the Department of Homeland Security. And if you know anything about what's happening in Haiti right now, these migrants definitely meet the standard for the people this law was enacted to protect. For the record, you really cannot even really go to Haiti right now. My mom and I were actually supposed to have a stop in Haiti on a cruise earlier this year in April, and it got canceled. We had to divert to a different place. The U.S. has issued a travel advisory telling Americans not to go to Haiti due to kidnapping, crime, civil unrest, and limited health care. They've been in a state of emergency since March of 2024. So to recap, these are 15,000 of his constituents, not 20,000, who are here legally, who by all accounts have broken absolutely no laws, who by all accounts are hardworking people, who are doing things the right way, who are the exact kind of people you would want here. And yet he is refusing to acknowledge them, continuing to demonize them, making things up about them, and then justifying those lies by saying we need to focus on the problems that they're creating, as which we really can't point to. Like, if everything I've read from the actual credible sources on the ground say the two main problems they're having is creating enough housing for them, because obviously an influx, you have to create more infrastructure for people, and this has happened quite quickly, but it is spurring economic growth along with it, which the town did not have previously. So in the long run, this will be better for the town, which was going to die out otherwise without this. And the other problem seems to be that these people don't really know how to drive and they're getting driver's licenses. Okay, these are problems that, should get some attention probably. And as a sitting U.S. senator, I would think you would be in some position to help address these things in a normal and sane way without creating mass hysteria and chaos and ending up with bomb threats against your hospitals and schools. You utter buffoon. All of this is bad enough as it is, but especially for the people who consider themselves Christians that are in this population of MAGA. You have no room here. It is without question that you are told in the Bible how to love and care for immigrants, period. End of story. This dehumanization against a group of people is disgusting. It's depraved. It's immoral. This is some idiot on Twitter named Josh Dawes, and he tweeted, "It's okay to use deception in service of defeating the left. It's not sinning in order to do good. It's being righteously shrewd in order to do good. It's also okay to enjoy it. Lighten up." This is why Christianity is dying in America, because it's actually becoming just GOP BS. It's actually not baked in theology whatsoever. Ben Marsh, who's a pastor on Twitter, quote tweeted it and said, "The beautiful thing about this is it is actually just straight up heresy." Another person, Mason Menenga, quote tweeted it and said, "It's interesting that the people who want the 10 Commandments displayed in schools are the same people who believe in breaking one of the 10 Commandments." Mic drop. And lastly, Zach W. Lambert said, "Your kids are not leaving the church because you didn't train them enough. Your kids are leaving the church because you trained them well enough to develop a sense for truth and justice. You let them read the words of Jesus and they got it. And they've recognized that the church doesn't seem to be interested in those words. They're not leaving because they don't know the truth. They're leaving because they do," which is a quote from Rhett McLaughlin. All right, moving on. In a hilarious turn of event, the Teamsters union has announced that it will not make an endorsement in this election, choosing neither Trump nor Harris as its preferred candidate. And I just have to rant on this for a minute because I love to see it. The Biden administration has flat out prostituted itself for unions over the past 4 years. I've never seen anything like it. Biden came in promising to be like the most pro-union president since FDR, and he has tried to make good on it. And by making good on it, what that has required is basically trying to use the government to go after people like independent contractors and forcing them back into 9-to-5 jobs that they don't want to work so that unions can get a hold of their money and then funnel that money back to the Democratic Party. And he's done all kinds of stuff like this behind the scenes, okay? Like, it has been all hands on deck for those of us working in like free market economics. It's been atrocious. And yet the Teamsters won't back him, which is just chef's kiss. Now, the reason they won't back him is because unions are stupid, okay? The only reason that unions are ever able to secure higher wages or job protection for anybody is because they are using the government to essentially bend the laws of supply and demand and basic reality for a small time period. And that's what they've been able to do for a few decades in this country. But when it comes to the Teamsters, their industry is dying out. And the Democrats' plans around climate change are going to expedite that. It's happening either way, but all of their like green energy plans, all of their push to move to electric vehicles, it's going to eliminate a lot of these people's jobs. And there's nothing that the union can do to stop that except to try to delay the Democrats' climate change agenda. So the Democrats got caught in a rock and a hard place between trying to push their green energy BS and appeal to the unions, and basically they lost out in this round. But that doesn't make the unions correct here or the good guys by any means. What they're hoping for is the rise in nationalist idiocracy on the right that will come in and use the government to basically protect their jobs from innovation and progress, which is not good, okay? Not good. I can't stand to see people like J.D. Vance and Trump and Josh Hawley sucking up to the unions. Unions are leeches. The fact that they are at their lowest membership levels of all time in the private sector is a good thing. I really think that speaks volumes about how much Americans have woken up to the problems with them. Good workers don't need unions, okay? And we shouldn't be stagnating progress and innovation and capitalism to keep old, bad jobs. We should allow progress so we get new, more efficient, better jobs. So I'm not in favor of the Teamsters. I just want to be clear. Hate a union, but I also kind of love to see them, bite the hand that's been feeding them. And lastly, this week, the Federal Reserve announced a half-point rate cut, the first since March of 2020, which might not sound like much, but it's actually a pretty aggressive move. The decision was not unanimous, which is interesting. Fed Governor Michelle Bowman, who has frequently expressed worries about lingering price pressures, was the lone dissenter, backing a quarter-point cut instead. That was actually the first dissent from a Fed governor on a decision since 2005. Now, to be clear, what they're trying to do here is desperately save the job market before an election happens. Central bankers expect that unemployment will rise higher this year to 4.4%, up from the current rate of 4.2% as of August, which I would say is a number that is already baked at best because they have been flat out lying on the jobs report numbers for months. I've covered that on this show numerous times. They have been quietly revising the numbers down every single month. It is a joke. I firmly think that the job market is already in a very deep crisis. But that's why they're making this drastic move. Basically, they're turning away from trying to stop inflation, and now they're trying to save the job market. They're trying to have a soft landing. This was reported from CNN. They say the Fed has indeed walked a fine line in taming price pressures without sacrificing America's job market, an extremely difficult task because rate hikes function by deliberately cooling the economy. That tool wielded by the Fed is typically described as a sledgehammer, not a scalpel. Still, despite inflation receding, jitters remain, mostly centered around the job market's future now, rather than the possibility of inflation getting stuck or reigniting. That's precisely why some called for the Fed to start cutting rates aggressively. The unemployment rate ratcheted up relatively quickly over the past year, though from an unusually low point. Economists have widely said that whenever unemployment begins to rise, it tends to catch momentum and keep rising. That has put into jeopardy a possible soft landing for the U.S. economy, a scenario in which inflation is tamed without a sharp increase in unemployment. Such an outcome has only happened once in modern history in the mid-1990s, so they say the Fed is within reach of a historic achievement. I think we're in danger. So what does this all mean for you? The question ultimately is still, will they or won't they actually have this soft landing? It's a very delicate balance, and we very quickly could tip into a recession with high unemployment, which no one wants, and they've been trying to avoid since politicians and the Feds created this whole mess by spending and printing a astonishing number of dollars in 2020 and 2021. This is not capitalism, folks, and it's why you shouldn't have a centrally planned economy in the first place, nor should the Federal Reserve exist. All right, guys, that's a wrap for this week. I want you to leave me one positive comment this week. Let me know something that is making you feel positive about the world, because I think we all need it. And I actually want to give you a referral to another podcast I heard this week. It's one of my favorites. It's a show called Hidden Brain. I'm going to put it in the show notes. But they have a recent episode out about fighting despair and cynicism that I think we could all benefit from listening to. So if you want something uplifting after this news cycle like me, tune into that next. I hope you like this episode. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you've not already, and if you want even more content, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok.